questions and discussion.
Thank you, Vice President Studham, for an outstanding report. And now I would like to invite the Regents to make comments or ask questions. Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Vice Chair Larson. Vice President, thank you for the report. I realize that the slide you showed us on is of expectations, the hype cycles graphic, but I found it really helpful just to see all of the things that are on that graph, and I have two questions about them. One, would it be fair to say that these aren't independent variables, so where we might be in your color coding could be affected by one that's in a different color coding, particularly if it's red? Is that correct?
Yeah. Chair Cohen, Regent Simmons, you're absolutely correct. They are very related to each other, and as we see one progress faster maybe than we even anticipated it has compounding effects on many of the other ones.
And my second question related to this is, how significant would you, how concerned are you that lecture capture and retrieval tools for distant education is in red?
Chair Cohen, Regent Simmons, that's been an investment that we've begun making this year. Many of our video capturing systems were moving from a more homegrown solution to a product called Camtasia and Kaltura. They're industry standard technologies, so I expect to see a rapid change there over the next 12-month period.
Thank you.
Regent Allen.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. My question goes to kind of the whole heart of our work as a Research One institution. $192 million is a big budget, and much of it I expect is recovered by charging it back to various operations. In the research area, you know, are we competing with, well, first of all, do we charge back most of our costs to projects who are using it? And does that put us at any disadvantage with some other research institution that might have found a way to finance the IT operation some other way, and they're essentially giving almost free time to researchers? That's a tough question to figure out, but I expect we're doing a balancing act there somehow. But right. How do we handle that?
Sure, Regent Allen, that's an excellent question. That it is complicated. Our support for research comes twofold. The Vice President for Research and through my office both support research computationally. The chargeback for it, we do provide about 1/3 of it through central services. Most of it, though, is done locally. There is an OMB 123 requirement that we don't charge them for something that the feds have also paid for. When we recoup the overhead, we can't also then charge them as a principal investigator on their project.
Just to follow up, though, in the way we do it, are we finding that we have any tough competition among other universities of our research capacity? Are they doing it other ways that give them an advantage at all, and do we need to look at that question?
Chair Cohen, Regent Allen, that is a good question. I think we should continue to explore ways to optimize our research environment, but I don't see us doing it any differently than the other Big Ten institutions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Larson. Thank you, Vice President Studham, on the report. My question loops into the next presentation as much as it does yours, and that is the organizational structure of this function. I've always thought that IT of any of the decentralized functions has the strongest argument to centralize, and the graph you have in here that indicates you've got about 360 people in the central office and then a larger number distributed out. I note that we're now going to be engaging Huron to look at our other sort of structural and delivery sort of processes, and I hope they're going to look at this function as something that is a candidate for further centralization, because you pointed out in your presentation the difficulty in getting best practice, and there is really no room in IT other than to have really a uniform set of standards, and otherwise I don't know where we avoid risk and how we achieve efficiency unless we've really got this. And looking at your heat chart of where the other universities, they're all over the board, but is centralization sort of occurring in the industry? Do you see that?
Chair Cohen, Regent Beeson, that's an excellent question, and we're looking forward to an external independent review and recommendations on that. But prior to receiving that, I'm happy to share with you my personal opinion on the centralization aspects in our industry. There are many aspects of IT that are best done centrally. There are many aspects of IT that are best done locally. Oftentimes, the most nimble aspects of information technology, the things that are closest to the researcher who's doing something truly unique, has to be done locally. The instructional methodology for somebody in the School of Nursing is very different than the instructional methodology for somebody in Carlson School. So when you get to that end, the part that's closest to the instructor or faculty member, it's not a commodity yet. It's very unique. The challenge is that things start there and then they have to move centrally. So we're always centralizing things. Things like, if we think back 2 decades ago, it was unique to have, well, let's go 4 decades ago first. It was unique to have a phone system. So many places would actually stand up their own local phone systems. We centralized the phones. Then about 2 decades ago, it was unique to have networks. So the computer science department built their own network, right? And then everybody built their own network, and then we centralized the networks. That high-end desktop support was something that A, wasn't done adequately centrally, and B, had to be highly customized, because you think about computers a decade ago, they were kind of complicated. Now they're pretty standard mainstream devices. So that's something we're centralizing now. There is a shift to centralize them, and then once we have them centralized, we often move them to the private sector. So things like our phone system or our network, those are things where they really are now commodities that we're doing centrally, and we get our dial tone now from the private sector instead of providing it ourselves. So it's always this kind of continuum. That being said, as a whole, it's not centralize it or distribute it. That's a false dichotomy, but to answer your question, there is a move more towards centralization, but it's not a move to total centralization.
Other questions? Regent Frobenius.
Following that, I've been figuring out, looking back at this chart that Regent Beeson just referred to about the overall cost of IT by function, and I was thinking through this centralization question. I was sort of trying to ask you what you thought this might look like at the end of the 6-year plan time period in terms of the relative balance. And then I kind of began to have to think about a different model. This may be a stretch in thinking, but if you think about really our foundation structure, you have a centralized, which we've now merged together, but we have a centralized foundation entity with a whole raft of foundation staff working very diligently on the needs of the School of Public Health or the College of Science and Engineering, pick your program, very actively engaging the central function resource into each of these institutions, or each of these sub-colleges. It strikes me that's really what you're sort of evolving towards here. Is that a reasonable analysis?
Yes, Chair Cohen, Regent Frobenius. When we look at on 2 ends of a spectrum, remembering it as a false dichotomy where you'd have the foundation model of a highly coordinated, centralized function, but it's distributed and federated to each college, versus more of what we have now, or even highly distributed. You could even imagine it being more distributed. We will be moving much closer to the foundation model, but it's really probably going to be something that's unique for IT. It'll probably be something that's a third model that we haven't fully finalized or baked up yet, but as we evolve towards it, it will be more towards that foundation model. I'm looking forward to learning from the Huron report on recommendations on how to get us there.
Regent Devine.
Vice President, thank you for the fine report and the follow-up from the time that we went through our approval, just what seemed like just a few short months ago. It's obvious that they've made great progress. The graph that I found interesting was on the graph on page 7, which you had the comparable schools in the quartiles. Is there an optimal positioning? You know, the variance between all the various schools there, many of whom are the comparables that we typically benchmark off of, is there an optimal positioning within that quartile graph on where we want to eventually end up here? Is there an emulation that we're trying to follow relative to that, or is it still kind of in progress?
Chair Cohn, Regent Devine, I think that's an excellent question. I don't think we can change that graph. I think we have to just observe that that's our culture. We can look at we're going to evolve it in a direction, right? So I would say it's going to, our dot will evolve from, I don't have the graph in front of me, but it's in the upper right-hand corner, I believe, is where we are. Is that correct? Thank you. More towards the lower left-hand corner. We'll start gradually moving that direction.
So with these updates and with these changes, then, you'll see a positioning moving in terms of what that graph looks like now versus, say, 5 years from now.
Right. My hope and aspiration would be that we will consolidate the right aspects, so we'll centralize the right aspects of information technology, realizing there's always a local need for truly customized, unique services. So it's going to move more that direction, so I think that's moving down the axis. Likewise, we're very formalized, and we're very process-oriented, very risk-averse. I'd like us to see us move a little less formality in some of our decision-makings in IT, specifically due to the pace by which IT is made.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Vice President Studham, we appreciate your report. Thank you very much, and go Gophers, okay?
Thank you.